He is the worst serial killer in Russia's history.
He just liked to kill.
We just wanted to catch him, to stop people being killed.
36 victims. It's so hard for most people to wrap their head around the thought of actually taking a human life and getting away with it. But there are killers out there who have done just that. In fact, there's some that are on the loose right now. The following stories tell the tale of 3 horrific killers that did unimaginable things. These are people who preyed on the vulnerable, betrayed those who trusted them, and committed some of the most unimaginable acts of evil. One of them was a killer who totally got away and became a celebrity for his crimes, which included eating other people. Another loved to kill women, was released from custody to kill some more. And a third confessed to dozens of shocking murders.
まさにその自分がなんでこんなへんてこな妄想を僕だけです。この家族誰もない。だからもしかしたら僕は他の宇宙か次元かからたまたま飛び込んできた隕石のようにガード下に赤ん坊として寝かされていて。
Issei Sagawa was born in April of 1949. He was never a normal person. This man spent his youth dreaming of what it would be like to consume actual flesh. While he was in college, he decided to make his dream become reality. But let's first go back to when Issei was born. He was born in Japan to wealthy parents. He had one brother. His father had a high power position. While Issei's mother was pregnant with him, she nearly had a miscarriage after a bad fall. He ended up being born premature. He was incredibly small, even fitting into the palm of his parents' hands. He never ended up growing very big. He was very thin and short with small legs. He was well loved by his parents.
何の苦しみも悲しみもなくて、両親も深い愛情で見つめてくれて、広い自然の中で、大切に育てられ、好きな。
Despite his small size, Issei was attracted to taller women with a more Western look. He fantasized about finding what he viewed as the perfect woman. Growing up, Issei wasn't very confident due to his small size, and so he spent a lot of his time reading books. He loved reading so much that he eventually decided to pursue a career in literature. Issei's mother was extremely overprotective of him and sheltered him quite a bit. This could have played a role in his development. Strangely, Issei first found out what cannibalism was when he was just a little boy. As bizarre as it sounds, Issei had an uncle who could celebrate New Year's by dressing up as the cannibal monster that ate little boys. He would terrify Issei by chasing him and his brother around, saying he was going to eat them. Meanwhile, Issei's father would join in on the game by pretending to be a hero that would protect them. Ultimately, the monster would always win, and Issei's uncle would scoop the boys up and lead them over to a giant cooking pot. These games traumatized Issei and affected the rest of his life. As soon as Issei was old enough to read, his favorite types of books were ones that involved people being eaten, either by other people, or monsters, or dragons. Hansel and Gretel was one of his favorites, since it's about a witch that captures and cooks children to eat. He even liked the idea of someone preparing his body to be eaten. He was a smart young boy, and enjoyed school despite being an outcast. The first time he ever thought about wanting to eat someone else was when he was in first grade. He saw a classmate's thigh and thought it looked incredibly tasty. In Issei's household, the topic of intimacy was very taboo, and his parents never discussed it. When his body began changing when he hit puberty, he was terrified because he thought something was wrong with him. His parents had never taught him what to expect about growing up or puberty. Because he didn't understand how intercourse works, he would do a lot of weird, gross things, sometimes involving animals. Once he got a little older, he became infatuated with the female body and read books that discussed it in great detail. At that point, he didn't actually want to kill a woman, he just wanted to chew on one's skin. As disgusting as it sounds, it's believed that cannibalism has actually been going on since way back in history, hundreds of thousands of years ago. In the beginning, it may have started due to a need for food. People may have thought that since an individual was dead, there was no harm in eating their bodies. But today, most people consider cannibalism absolutely horrific and disgusting. It's hard to imagine that anyone would want to do something like that. Most people don't even like to think about it. But not Icy. Icy's fascination with cannibalism was likely connected to some sort of disorder dating back to when he was a child. As an adult, Icy's thoughts of cannibalism were connected to sexual thoughts of women, especially those in the Western world, like Grace Kelly. He loved the thought of eating Grace Kelly.
で、女性に対してはっきりとカニバリズムの妄想を感じたのは小学校4年の時で、非常に奥手で電話をする時も手が震えて吐きそうになりました。でもその子の白いなんていうかな、太ももスカートから階段を降りる時に見たら、やっぱりカニ食べてみたいなっていう。
Eventually, thoughts of violence entered his fantasies. He was obsessed with the thought of killing and eating women. He couldn't even be aroused without thinking about cannibalism and death. He knew that there was something wrong with him. In fact, when he was younger, he actually tried to get himself therapy. He contacted a therapist through the phone, but they would not see him unless he came in person. He was too embarrassed to do that, so he eventually decided that therapy would not be an option for him. It's crazy to think how different his life would have turned out if he had gone through and gotten the help that he needed. When Icy was 24 years old and in college, he began to stalk a German woman. She lived in the same neighborhood as his grandmother and didn't always close her windows during the night. He saw an opportunity and decided to take it. He went to the woman's house and waited outside until he was confident that she was sleeping. He then climbed through the window. His horrific plan was to knock her unconscious with an umbrella and use a knife to cut off a small piece of her body. He would then leave and be able to eat that. But before Icy could attack the woman, he accidentally brushed up against her, waking her up. She saw him and screamed, causing him to run away. In a later interview, Icy said he was charged with attempted assault due to this incident. He didn't tell police what he was really planning to do when he entered the woman's house. Strangely, the charges against Icy were later dropped, and he never had to pay for what he did. Icy would end up completing his master's degree in literature and moving on to a new university in France to get his PhD. Now in Paris, Icy was surrounded by the types of beautiful women he had always fantasized about. On top of that, many of them didn't dress very modestly like the women from back home. It must have seemed like paradise to him. He began finally trying to make his sick dreams a reality by bringing home streetwalkers night after night. His plan was to wait for these women to fall asleep or go to the bathroom, and as soon as they were vulnerable, he would shoot them and eat them. But time after time, he kept losing his nerve and couldn't bring himself to actually do it. There was something in his brain that held him back from pulling the trigger. Deep down, he knew that if he really did it, his life as he knew it would change forever. 2 years after moving to France, Icy would end up meeting a pretty fellow student. Her name was Renee. She was from the Netherlands and had come to Paris to study literature, just like him. He found her stunning and very friendly. He eventually noticed that she would typically ride the same bus home from school that she did. He ended up making chit-chat with her during one of the classes that they shared together, and she brought up the idea of them meeting outside of school at a Greek restaurant along with other people their age. While he wasn't a very social person, he agreed to go since she was going. While they were out eating, a few of the fellow students talked about how they were interested in trying Japanese food. So Icy offered to host a dinner where he would cook food from home for them. But when the night of the dinner arrived, Renee was the only one that ended up showing up. Icy was caught off guard. He hadn't expected to be alone with her that night, but he couldn't follow through with any of the plans of killing her then because he hadn't prepared himself. So the two chatted and the topic of language came up. Renee revealed that she was fluent in 3 different languages. Icy saw an opportunity and ended up asking Renee if she would tutor him if he paid her. She didn't have much money at the time, so she agreed. The next time that Renee arrived at his house to tutor him, his plan was to kill her. Ultimately, he couldn't do it. He felt like a coward because he just couldn't wrap his head around the idea of taking another person's life. He knew deep down that it was wrong. Renee and Icy started getting closer and closer and would hang out frequently. She would come over to his house all the time to share meals with him and tutor him. He had many opportunities to hurt her, and even though he wanted to, he couldn't, at least not for a while. He would overcome his fears about taking a life in June of 1981. Renee had come over to his house for a German lesson. He decided that was going to be the day that he was finally going to do it. While she was seated at a desk with her back turned, he got up, grabbed his gun, and pointed it at her head. This time, he actually pulled the trigger. But shockingly, the gun misfired, and no bullet came out. Renee hadn't even realized what happened. Icy quickly put his gun down and sat down next to her as if everything was normal. He tried to pretend he was interested in the German lesson she was teaching, despite only using the lesson as a way to get Renee inside of his home. Just 2 days later, Icy invited Renee over again. He told her he needed her help recording some German poetry. She agreed. Just as he had done before, he waited until she was turned around while sitting at the desk, got his gun, and aimed it at her neck. He had finally achieved his dream and had killed her. Renee's body fell to the floor, and she began bleeding. As excitement overcame him, Icy actually fainted. When he came to, he took Renee's clothes off and flipped her body over. He now planned to eat. He bit straight onto her buttocks. His teeth weren't powerful enough to get any meat. None of the knives he had in the house would get the job done either, so he went out and got a big butcher knife. No one walking by his home that night could have ever imagined the horrors that were going on behind closed doors. Icy continued cutting until he found a satisfying chunk to devour raw. Finally, having committed cannibalism, he felt more turned on than ever before. He couldn't stop. For the next several days, he continued to pick. In the days after killing Renee, Icy would leave his home to dispose of all of Renee's clothing except for her pants. He kept those as some sort of sick trophy. Eventually, what was left of Renee began to smell badly and attract flies, so he knew he had to move it before people noticed. He ended up purchasing 2 large suitcases and packing her inside. He then called a taxi to take him to the park. The taxi driver helped him bring the 2 suitcases into the car and even commented on the fact that they were really heavy and made a joke suggesting Icy had a body in there. He played it off and said that it was just books inside. Icy took the suitcases to a beautiful lake where he planned to push them out onto the water where they would sink. What he didn't anticipate was that there would be so many people around. They were laying by the water and sunbathing. He couldn't do what he needed to do with all of them watching, so he just kept walking around. He eventually found a slope where he thought he would be able to push the suitcases down to the water without anyone noticing, but they were so heavy and he eventually had to take a break. A man walking by saw what he was doing and confronted him. He asked him what was inside of the suitcases and eventually opened one himself to find out. He was shocked to discover severed feet, and what he could tell was part of a woman's body. As soon as he made the discovery, Icy fled the scene. The man screamed out to the people gathered nearby, saying that this man was a murderer. They called the police, who were eventually able to track him down. When they later went to his house, they found pieces of a woman in his refrigerator. He admitted to what he had done and told them that he suffered from mental illness. Icy was brought before a judge and made to explain in detail what he did to Renee. The judge heard his story and found him to be too crazy to actually stand trial. So, instead of being sent to prison, he was sent to a mental asylum where he spent 2 years. The people of France were not very happy that the country was paying money to house a killer that wasn't even from France, and they began to express their displeasure. Meanwhile, Icy's father, who had lots of wealth and power, was formulating a deal with France that would allow his son to be sent back to Japan to live in a mental institution there. France eager to do whatever it took to get this person out of their country, agreed to the deal. Part of this involved France dropping the charges against him. Icy was sent back home to Japan, and when he arrived at the mental hospital, he was evaluated by a doctor. The doctor quickly came to the conclusion that Icy was, although disturbed, mentally stable. He believed that he certainly belonged behind bars. But at this point, since France had dropped the charges, there was nothing that Japan could do to bring him to justice for the horrific things he had done. He was freed and eventually released from the hospital, never having to pay for his crimes. Now, living as a free man, Icy was very low on money.
でそういうふうにもう仕事もなくなってもうないですから収入もないよ。
One day, he ended up being contacted by a local newspaper asking him to write a piece covering a story about a sadist having been recently captured and apprehended. Because Icy was pretty famous at that point for what he had done, they probably expected the article to do quite well, and it did. He ended up making quite a bit of money. As if that wasn't disturbing enough, he was also contacted by another company who asked him to write a comic book about his experience. His book, which is literally about killing and eating a woman, did tremendously well and sold thousands of copies. Icy would end up publishing many other books and continue to become more and more famous. He would even end up being invited to join a prestigious painting club where he would paint lots of pictures of women. He was even invited to be a part of a film. You're probably thinking about how disgusting it is that an incredibly evil killer not only avoided justice, but made a profit off of it. It may help you to know that his money eventually ran out, landing him once again in poverty. He ended up needing welfare.
5ヶ月滞納してますからいつ追い出されるかわからない。ここ追い出されたら僕は死ぬしかないと思ってるんでいつ死ぬかわからないからだから生きてる間は嗅ぎつけようと思って。
On top of this, he ended up struggling with health problems and requiring full-time caregivers. He is now 73 and claims he regrets his past decisions. He will die a slow, agonizing, and painful death due to his conditions. This one's about Pedro Lopez, monster of the Andes. Pedro Lopez of Colombia was born in 1949. At the time, the country was plagued by riots and violence. A popular political leader had been assassinated and a civil war broke loose throughout the country. It was not the time where you would want to be living in Colombia. Pedro was the son of a poor streetwalker. He was the 7th of 13 children. Growing up, his life was very hard. His mother was incredibly overbearing and controlling, but his life was still better at home than it would have been on the streets, where crime was taking over more than ever before. Pedro's life within the safety of his own home would not last long. When he was just 8 years old, his mother walked in on him having relations with his younger sister. She was furious and kicked him out of his own home, telling him never to return again. Pedro walked down the streets alone with nowhere to go, when all of a sudden he was approached by an older man who said he could take care of him. Pedro accepted the offer with the hopes of being taken to an actual home with food and a place to sleep. Instead, he was taken to an abandoned building where the man took advantage of him several times before throwing him back out on the streets. Scarred by this interaction, Pedro then became terrified by strangers. He spent his days sleeping during the comfort of the day and begging or searching for dumpsters for food at night. One day, an American couple happened to notice his disturbingly thin features and decided to take him in. They gave him food and a place to stay and eventually enrolled him in a local school. While they probably felt like they were doing the best thing for him, he ended up getting assaulted by one of his teachers, running away and returning to the streets. Pedro had very little education and didn't really have any trades, which made it difficult for him to find a job. He would get money through begging and stealing. Eventually, stealing caught up to him after he stole a car, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He was only in jail for a couple of days before being violently assaulted by a group of older inmates. It was then that Pedro promised himself that nobody would ever hurt him again. He fashioned weapons that he found in prison and killed each man that hurt him, earning only a 2-year longer sentence and losing most of the sanity that he had left. Pedro blamed his mother for everything that had happened in his life and wanted revenge. After he was released from prison, he would later admit to stalking and killing around 100 young girls around Peru. At one point, he was actually caught by a tribe of men and tortured for his attempt to hurt a young girl. They planned to kill him by burying him alive in sand, but a Christian missionary ended up saving his life by convincing them to turn him over to authorities instead. He would be forced to return to Colombia, where his murderous rampage continued. At one point, Pedro went into a grocery store and tried to kidnap a young girl who was with her mother shopping. Grocery store workers helped the girl's mom and chased him down. He was eventually taken into custody. While Pedro was behind bars, he declined to answer police questions. They ended up having a local priest dress up in prison guard clothing to try to see if he could get some answers out of him. Sure enough, Pedro was only too eager to discuss his crimes. Pedro eventually admitted to having murdered hundreds of girls across multiple countries.
I like the girls in Ecuador. They are more gentle and trusting, more innocent. They are not as suspicious of strangers as Colombian girls.
Pedro blamed his crimes on his tough childhood, claiming he found the need to find revenge on others because of what he experienced when he was only 8 and was kicked out of his home. He wanted to hurt as many girls as he could. He loved searching for his young female women during the light of day and would capture them at night. He would then strangle them to death while taking advantage of them. He loved watching the light in their eyes go out. This not only caused him arousal, but deep pleasure as he came to experience the death of so many innocent girls who were completely defenseless. It would be years before he was finally brought behind bars and made to pay for his crimes. Despite the fact that Pedro had admitted to killing many young girls, the legal system still ended up coming up with a deal that benefited him. They told him as long as he could provide them with the location of some of his young victims, they would reduce his sentence. He agreed, and shortly, after more than 50 of his young female victims' remains were found, the victims ranged in age from 8 through 12 years old. Pedro was then charged with many counts of murder. Pedro was later convicted and sentenced to life in jail, but he ended up getting released towards the end of 1998. Even upon his release, Pedro was absolutely obsessed with the thought of killing women and watching life leave their eyes. It gave him such a sense of power and longing. He absolutely loved the process of killing innocent women because they knew no better and simply had no way of defending themselves. He only enjoyed this killing experience if he could truly watch the girl pass away. Eventually, Pedro was arrested as an illegal immigrant and determined insane. Unfortunately, he ended up paying bail and getting released, free to continue the harm of others until the day of his death. This is the strange story of Alexander Pichushkin, a heartless killer. He was born in Moscow in April of 1974. His early life was relatively normal, from a freak accident that happened when he was young. He was injured while playing on a swing and hit his head, resulting in a brain injury. It is believed that his prefrontal cortex was damaged as a result of this injury. This part of the brain helps moderate aggression and impulsivity. This accident very well could have impacted the rest of his life and contributed to the horrific killer that he would later become. Because Alexander was just a young child when this accident occurred and he had such little padding in his head, it affected him far more than it would have if he was an adult. His life changed dramatically. He had to be switched out of his normal school and attend one that was for children with disabilities. He became aggressive, angry, and hostile. He was bullied by other children because of his mental problems. Despite Alexander's disability, he was an intelligent child, something that his grandfather recognized. Alexander's grandfather felt that his grandson's new school was far too obsessed with overcoming his disability than actually learning and fostering his intelligence. Eventually, he would take Alexander in to live with him. Alexander's grandfather wanted him to focus on learning new skills and taking interests in things outside of school. He taught him many things, one of which was how to play chess. He was shockingly good, despite his young age, and would often play against grown men. For a while, things in his life greatly improved as he had finally found something he enjoyed and was passionate about. Playing chess also helped him get his aggression back under control. Unfortunately, Alexander's grandfather would eventually pass away, and he would begin to struggle again. He was still getting bullied by mainstream children because of his disability, and he had to be moved back home to live with his mother again. As a way of trying to cope with the pain, not only of losing his beloved grandfather and the bullying, Alexander started drinking a lot of liquor. He would spend his time playing chess with older men and drinking. At this point, Alexander had begun some violent tendencies. Whenever he would come into contact with young children, he would threaten them while recording the whole thing on video. This made him feel more in control and powerful. By 1992, he was already on a murder rampage. He killed his own classmate with a hammer and buried his body. His next victim was a man who was dating a girl named Olga, someone that he was romantically interested in that had rejected him. Alexander made the man's death appear as an accident. After a long break, Alexander began killing again in 2001. His next kill began with a casual game of chess in the park with a 52-year-old man. Alexander lured the man into the woods, claiming that he wanted to visit the location of his dog's burial site in honor of the anniversary of the dog's death. But Alexander would ultimately use a bottle of vodka to strike him in the head and kill him. He then buried the body in a well. Between 2001 and 2005, Alexander attacked a whopping 36 victims. Only a few survived. Some of them he didn't even bother to properly bury or dispose of. He used a vodka bottle to kill and maim many of his victims. He would later say that killing others made him feel powerful, and as if he was God. Alexander's murder spree would come to an end in 2006 after a particularly bold killing. He convinced one of his co-workers, a girl named Marina, to go for a walk with him. Marina agreed to go, but she had a bad feeling about it. She even left a note behind for her son that said where she was going and who she was going with. It also had Alexander's phone number on it. Alexander knew that she had left the note, but it didn't hold him back from taking her life. Her body was later found in the park, where Alexander would often play chess. The police looked at surveillance footage from the metro and were able to see Alexander and Marina together, and he was arrested. While in custody, he ended up confessing to many of his other murders, and even helped lead police to where some of the bodies were located. You'll be relieved to know that, unlike the other killers on this list, Alexander is not on the loose. But his crimes were so horrific that we felt we had to include him on this list. He ended up being convicted of 49 murders and 3 attempted murders. Shockingly, he ended up asking the court to add 11 more victims to his conviction, bringing his murder count up to 60. A judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and with the first 15 years spent in solitary confinement. It was deemed that Alexander was evil, but not mentally ill, and was fit to serve his sentence. Today, he is 48 and remains behind bars where he will stay until the day of his death.
3 months ago, I learned of my uncle's passing. We weren't particularly close, but he left me one of his houses in his will. I was touched, but just wanted to sell it off. I'm a fairly new father of twin girls and didn't need another thing to manage right now. To speed up the process, I decided to travel across the country to live in the house until a sale was assured. My job just requires a laptop and phone, so I was approved to work remotely for the time being. Unfortunately, my wife had to stay at her job, so I had to come alone. At first, I treated it as a mini vacation. I had hoped it would only last a week, but the process was more involved than I thought. I had a realtor taking care of most of things, but after a month, I'm still here. I noticed things going wrong right away. Stuff was never where I'd last placed it. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye. I've lost track of time countlessly. I thought it was just caused by stress or loneliness. Except for the few times the realtor came by with prospective buyers, the house was the quietest place I'd ever been in. The neighbor came by with a dog. She was an elderly woman who explained that she had been dog-sitting while my uncle was in the hospital. Now that I was here, she thought I should take Buster, the golden retriever. I thought the neighbor might have been forgetful because she seemed to think my uncle had just passed last week. Either way, I fell in love with Buster and his presence was exactly what I needed. I even thought it would be a tremendous present to bring home to my girls. I just hoped my wife would feel the same way. However, even the dog could tell something was wrong with the house. Buster accepted his new living arrangements pretty quickly, but would never willingly go upstairs. This was all right with me at the time. I thought it would make it easier to keep track of him. Then, Buster disappeared. Literally, 1 second he was standing right behind me as I was opening the treat jar to give him a snack. My eyes left him for a moment to put the jar back, and then he was gone. I ran through the whole house calling his name. The kitchen was connected to the living room, and on the other end of that was the master bedroom and study. The other end of the kitchen led to the dining room, which was connected to the entrance hall that also led into the living room and the stairs to the second floor. After walking upstairs, you had a choice of left or right along a balcony that overlooked the living room on one side and entrance on the other. Going left led immediately to a guest room and a game room. Going right led to 2 more guest rooms and a bathroom at the end of the hall. I looked in every room and had to accept that somehow the dog made it outside, even though there was no doggy door and every door and window had been closed and locked. So I searched the surrounding neighborhood for another hour before giving up. I was thinking about making flyers when I opened the front door and heard Buster scrambling towards me from the kitchen. I was ecstatic, of course, but I just couldn't wrap my head around how I could have missed him. I let Buster sleep in the bed with me that night. In hindsight, it was a huge mistake, but it made me feel better at the time. Things picked up at work, though, and I soon forgot all about the strangeness surrounding this house. Clients called me constantly, and we were getting a lot done, and I landed multiple large contracts in a row. I was working around the clock, but I knew I'd be due a promotion once I returned to the home office. Several times, I'd get lost in a phone call or spreadsheet and suddenly find that it was nighttime. I'd be so absorbed with work that I would block out Buster whining for food or to go outside. I started to set alarms to keep track, but I had too many important clients to slow down. I was on top of the world, but my health was starting to suffer. I'd forget to eat and even sleep sometimes. There was always something else to do or someone to talk to. I even got better at taking care of Buster, or better than I was taking care of myself at least. Then my good mood ended with a bang. Literally. Buster was whining behind me as I finished another spreadsheet. Then we both heard a door slam upstairs. For the first time since I brought him inside, Buster ran upstairs by himself. I almost called the cops, but I felt silly with the phone in my hand. I started to doubt that I heard anything at all. And if there were an intruder, surely Buster would have been making more noise. So I mustered all the courage I could manage and crept upstairs with a frying pan as my weapon. It was dark upstairs, but enough moonlight was coming from the downstairs window for me to make out Buster standing in front of the bedroom. I had purposely closed every door when I last came through here looking for the lost dog, but this door was now wide open. I flipped on the hallway light, but nothing happened. With no better ideas, I raised my frying pan high and walked slowly to the bathroom. There was no window in here, so it was pure darkness inside. I was terrified. Bizarrely, Buster just looked frozen. His tail stood straight up, and he just stood there and pointed towards the door. I tried to take it as a good sign that he still wasn't barking. That's what finally got me through the threshold and into the bathroom. The whole time, my eyes had been getting used to the darkness, and the bathroom was too small for there to have been anyone in there without me noticing. I started to relax when I took a step forward into something sticky. I suddenly realized that I had my cell phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and turned it on to cast some light on the floor. I immediately dropped it at the sight of the bright red liquid that surrounded my feet. I fled the upstairs, and this triggered Buster to follow. This time, I had no trouble calling the police. Thankfully, there was already a patrol car nearby, so 2 officers arrived within a couple of minutes. Their powerful flashlights cut through the darkness like knives, but they soon found nothing was wrong with the upstairs lights. Something did appear to be wrong with my pipes, though, as they called out from above that the puddle was just rusty water. Because of their insistence, I climbed up the stairs again and clearly saw a muddy brown puddle in the bathroom. The banging must have been from the pipe breaking. Both the cops had a laugh at my expense, but were otherwise understanding. They even gave me the number of a good plumber, though my cell phone was ruined after I dropped and left it in the puddle. I would have to use the one landline in the kitchen from now on. I let them out and promised to call the plumber first thing in the morning. Yet, as exhausted as I was, I couldn't go to sleep over the excitement, so I stayed up to draft some more important documents for my company. Before I knew it, Buster had made another mess in the living room. I was dead tired and said something to Buster that maybe I shouldn't have. I decided to do something about the stress I was under, and I spoke to my supervisor that same morning. To my surprise, they were happy to let me have the week off as a sort of mental vacation. Just like that, all my outstanding work was taken away. With nothing else to do, I tried to focus on Buster. I played games with him and fed him a bunch of treats to make up for the earlier neglect. Then I found the first message. I didn't notice it for some time since I had been avoiding the second floor, but I realized that I hadn't actually called the plumber. Before doing so, I went upstairs to see if things had gotten any worse. Instead, I immediately saw a message written in red on the hallway wall. It read, "Losing your mind." For a second, I kinda did. I was scared to death at the thought that someone had to have sneaked into my house while I was there, probably when I was sleeping. I won't bear repeating everything I said or did right after. Let's just say I hadn't become any braver since the banging. Eventually, I unlocked my bedroom door and made my way to the kitchen with Buster leading the way. I called the police again. Those same two officers were able to show up, and then, slowly, we cleared every inch of the house, yet we found no one. Everything was locked, no sign of forced entry. The police actually took me seriously, something that bewildered me at the time, and admitted that this wasn't the first house in the neighborhood to experience this. There had been a series of break-ins where nothing was stolen, but the police officers still offered to have a car sit outside for the night. Even though I took them up on this, I soon realized that I'd never get to sleep tonight in this house. So I called my only friend in town, and really in the whole state, an old college roommate who coincidentally lived 30 minutes away. He offered to pick me and Buster up in a few hours, so I busied myself with packing up my suitcase. I didn't know how long I would need, so I pretty much packed everything I had brought with me to the house in the first place. I left my room to pick up some doggy toys when my friend called me, saying he was waiting outside. I decided to hang up the phone and meet him immediately. I needed the human company, and he could help me move my stuff. But the driveway was empty. There was no friend, no car. I called him back immediately, and he insisted he was outside. I listened to him get out of his car and walk up to the front door. He knocked, and I could hear the door open, and an elderly woman greet him. My friend asked for my name and mentioned my uncle. The woman said that she had never heard of either of us. After thanking her, my friend left and asked me if I'd gotten all of that. I told him that I must have given him the wrong address. He rattled off the correct one and confirmed he was there. After asking him to wait, and I left the house again, I walked out to the street and looked back at the numbers written on the curb and on the mailbox. Only there weren't any numbers. Just a message, "Losing your mind," on the curb, written in red. The temptation to leave right away was great. I could just start walking and never stop, but I had to get my stuff, and more importantly, Buster. So I entered the house one last time. When I came back to my room, my suitcase was empty. Everything I had just spent the last hour packing was back in its proper place. Despite how impossible this was, I focused on only one goal. We needed to leave. I put a leash on Buster and was shocked to see how haggard he was. I resolved to make it up to him when this was all over. I tried to leave out the front door like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't open it. The knob turned freely, but the deadbolt wouldn't slide back. I was really scared now, but Buster's presence helped. I knelt down to give him a hug, and he gave me an idea while licking my face. Whatever was happening, it sure wasn't the result of a maniac hiding in my house. Still, I didn't know what forces were actually opposing me, so I walked to the backyard and said loudly, Well, Buster, time for a little walk. The glass door slid open easily. Buster bounded out happily. I guess it had been a long time since I let him outside. I followed more tentatively and, for the first time, examined the backyard closely. There was an iron fence surrounding the yard with another space between the bars that Buster could slide through. And then I saw it. A tree that grew too close to the fence and had several branches extending through and above it. I assumed the gate would be supernaturally locked too, so this was my exit. Buster didn't need any prodding. He waited patiently for me on the other side as I painfully pulled myself up and over the fence. I was suddenly aware of how weak and tired my recent lifestyle had made me. When I was in the process of climbing down the tree on the other side, Buster growled once and then took off like a shot towards the nearby hill. I jumped down and gave chase. He disappeared over the top, and I scrambled to keep up on the surprisingly steep surface. Luckily, I found where someone had laid some stone bricks into the side for an easier way up. It was still steep enough that I had to focus on placing my feet correctly to keep from sliding, so I was looking down when my next reach up resulted in my hand grabbing carpet. Confused, I looked up to see the second-floor landing. I looked down to see the rest of the stairs that had led to the entrance hall and the living room of the house. Buster was nowhere to be found. Demoralized and dead tired, I crawled the final steps and just sat on the landing for a while, occasionally calling for Buster. Eventually, the kitchen phone rang. Whatever ghosts were messing with me, I realized they couldn't stop outside forces from helping. I tumbled down the stairs in my haste and landed hard on the cold tiles below, but I was only dazed for a second and soon was in the kitchen with the phone in my hand. My wife's warm voice filled me with hope. She was concerned that she hadn't heard from me in a while. I couldn't recall the last time I had even tried. She tried telling me that my work hadn't heard from me in a week, while I tried to tell her to call the police. Her words gave me pause, though. I asked, "What do you mean? I was given the week off." "Dear, I thought you were supposed to continue working as soon as you got there." "Well, yeah, but they gave me a week off because all of the stress I've been under." "Wait a second. How long have I been here?" "Honey, you've been gone almost 9 days now." My stomach sunk, but I didn't hesitate to say, "Listen, I need you to call the cops. Something is wrong. I think I'm having a medical emergency." I'd just been trying to come up with an excuse to limit the amount of follow-up questions, but I ended up realizing that this was actually the most likely explanation. Maybe I was just suffering from a gas leak or a brain tumor. Ironically, either of those seemed preferable to living in a haunted house. My wife asked, "Baby, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I thought I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye as I answered, "Yes, I'm okay, but no, I need help. There's something wrong about this house." "You aren't making any sense." "Just listen to me. Call the police. Tell them my uncle's name. Tell them to come to this house and an ambulance might be needed. Please, help me." "Please help you? Pretty please? With a cherry on top?" I stared at the phone in my hand as my wife's voice continued to come out of it. It sounded like her, but in a mocking tone I've never actually heard from her before. She said, "Does your tummy hurt? When's the last time you ate? I wonder what Buster tastes like." I slammed the phone down, but whatever it was on the other side was right. My stomach was hurting, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. On cue, I heard Buster whining from upstairs. Only after I started running towards the stairs did I notice how bruised and sore my legs were from the spill down those steps. I pushed through the pain and climbed the stairs yet again. Buster was back in front of the bathroom, lying on his side and looking thinner than I'd ever seen him. "Losing your mind" was written all over the hallway now, including on the ceiling and the floor. I no longer had any doubt that the messages were written in blood. Some of them were still dripping. I walked over and picked up Buster while the banging started on my front door. I would have jumped if Buster hadn't been weighing me down. I heard the front door open, and whoever it was identified themselves as the police. I even recognized the voice as belonging to one of the officers who had visited previously. Why can't I remember his name? After calling out that I was upstairs, I turned with Buster and found the hallway stretched before me, many times its original length. Despite how thin he looked, Buster felt heavier than ever. I knew this was all just some sort of trick to not get me in touch with the police officer. I thought I must have really been talking to my wife. She had to have come through with calling the police, and the ghost just distorted the end of the call. So I started to trek back to the stairs and shuffled my feet as fast as I could, yelling all the way. But then a voice answered the police officer. was a woman's voice, my wife's voice. I could hear her say, "I'm sorry, my husband wasn't feeling well. He's just resting in the bedroom. Can I help you?" I screamed as loud as I could just to get attention, but it was no use. I heard the officer say, "I'd like to check up on him all the same." Sure, come in. He's right through here." It was right out of a nightmare. I was sweating profusely while every step seemed to get me nowhere. I tried to speed up, but the hallway just stretched further. And then I heard a man's blood-curdling scream from downstairs. Suddenly, the hallway snapped back and I found myself right at the top of the stairs. My momentum couldn't be stopped. I fell down the stairs and landed hard on top of Buster. He howled in pain, but at least he was still alive. I saw a long, thick trail of blood go around the corner and under my closed bedroom door. There was still a shadow of something under the door. I painfully crept to the kitchen and grabbed my trusty frying pan before making my way back to the bedroom door, as quietly as I could. My eyes watched the moving shadows nervously. Whatever was waiting here had killed a man. That meant it could kill me. But if it could have a physical impact, then surely it had to be susceptible to a physical impact too. So I raised the frying pan and slowly started to turn the handle. Before I made much progress, the door flew open on its own and something turned suddenly to me. I swung my frying pan down. The cop stood before me, a smile frozen on his face. We both looked down at the knife plunged into his chest. My hand was still wrapped around the handle. He fell to the side and I fell backwards to sit heavily on the now clean floor. I was positive I had picked up the frying pan. I could remember its weight, but now I also remembered going to the kitchen and pulling out the knife. I seriously wondered if I was losing my mind. I looked down to find I had the knife in my hands again. I dropped it at once and crawled back to check on Buster. He wasn't moving. I put my hand on his flank and was devastated to feel he was still warm, but not breathing. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I did nothing for a long time. I was lethargic, but somehow made it to the couch in the living room. I waited there until nightfall, and then slept on the couch. When I woke up, I waited some more. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but nothing horrible was happening to me while I waited. I wasn't in a hurry to change that. But the bodies of Buster and the cop were still there. I needed to do something. My stomach rumbled as I finally got off the couch. That was another problem with just staying put. First things first. I found a shovel in the outdoor closet attached to the backyard porch. Digging the hole was exhausting, so I settled for just burying Buster for now. I planned on getting to the cop after finding something to eat. I picked up Buster and carried him outside. His fur was still so warm. It was hard to believe he was gone, but there was no life behind his big brown eyes. I gently laid him down in the hole and got to work. Sometime later, I wandered into the kitchen and raided the pantry. The house was quiet apart from my efforts. Whenever I stopped moving, the silence was complete. I wondered if the ghosts had just been trying to make me a murderer after all. Now that their goal had been met, maybe they would leave me alone for a while. Just in time because I was starving and didn't need any more distractions. I opened up the box of cereal and had a handful up to my lips when I paused. How could I tell I was actually eating what I was looking at? What if I had actually been opening a box of rat poison? I still wasn't sure what these ghosts were capable of. I imagined the food turning into worms after it was already in my mouth. With that thought, I threw the cereal to the ground and stomped off, no longer hungry. I needed to concentrate on my efforts of leaving this place. Right on cue, I walked by the front door. It was wide open. Instinctively, I made a leap for it before stopping with my outstretched hand just a foot short of the door. This had to be another trick. I could see the door slamming shut in my face, or even taking a few of my fingers with it. I could feel a breeze enter the house, but I was too scared to move. This was the most impossible situation I had ever been in or even heard of. All of my senses had failed me before. However, my need for freedom eventually caused my feet to move. Upon slowly exiting the house, I saw the cop car just sitting in the driveway. The doors were unlocked and the keys were sitting in the front seat. My mind went wild trying to explain the situation. Maybe the cop was secretly a murderer and had killed the previous owners of this house. Maybe this sacrifice helped them move on. I couldn't think of any other explanation for my good luck at the time. So I just pushed my misgivings down and got in. I drove out of the neighborhood without incident, but I had new problems. I was in an unfamiliar city, driving a cop car with no money or other belongings on me. I had no idea what to do next. So I kept driving. It felt good to be free of that house. It felt good to see the sun. So I kept driving. On and on. Left turn. Right turn. Left turn. Right turn. No idea where I'm going. And then I realized I hadn't seen any other cars on the road for some time. Where was everyone? Where was I? The sinking feeling happened again, in the pit of my stomach, but also around my whole body. I sunk back into the car seat and then realized I was sitting in an armchair, back in the living room of my uncle's house. My arms were up like I was holding onto a steering wheel. I started to cry in frustration as I stood up and screamed. How long had I just been sitting there with a stupid grin, moving my arms up and down like a madman? I turned around and saw my work laptop on the dining room table. It was open and glowing at me. I walked over to it and saw that something was already written down in this post. It read, "Lost your mind. Good. Now you won't mind losing the rest." Suddenly, my fist felt weighed down. I raised it to find another kitchen knife in my hand. I dropped it immediately. I erased the message and started to type out a request for help. I ignored the screen and just focused on the keys, but I kept hitting them wrong and another message slowly formed. "I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all for the last time. Goodbye." I could have screamed again, but I noticed something had changed. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in the study. I kept writing and writing and writing, and my own words started to come out. I have sent out emails requesting help. I've posted on the local police department's Facebook for assistance, and I've just tried to keep writing no matter what. This is my last attempt to keep my sanity. Whenever I've tried to take a break, I find myself in a new room with new horrors descending on me. Once I opened the study door out to a hellish landscape and almost stepped out into lava. I wasn't sure if it was all an illusion, but I didn't even want to have a vision of my feet burning, so I just closed the door and resumed writing. I'm not even sure this is all because of ghosts. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and the truth is simply that I have no idea what's going on. As I've gone over these crazy events, I've realized that I can't recall my uncle's name or what he looks like. I'm not sure I ever had an uncle. I'm trying to think really hard about how I came here. Did I fly? Drive? I can't remember. Have I always been here? Even weirder, I can't remember my realtor's name, or even what gender they are. I've met them in person several times. Why don't I know things I should? I can't even remember the name of my daughters or wife. Am I even a father? Am I even a person? I know I must be because I'm here writing in this small study. But now that I think about it, I can't remember who my parents are, what they looked like, or anything about my childhood. Now, I just remember this house and all the nightmares, waking and otherwise, I've experienced here. I'm feeling a lot like I was back in the cop car. I found a way forward, but really don't know what to do next. This is not a way to live, and I'm getting more and more tired. I'm so hungry. I'm finding it harder to focus. I keep hearing voices, and they're getting louder. I know if I stop writing, I won't last long, but I'm running out of things to say. My hands are tired. I'm tired. So tired. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, Z. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs. I need to keep writing, but I don't know what to say anymore. What's my name? I don't know. I'll die if I stop writing. I'll die if I stop working. A, B, C, E, R, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, Q, P, R, S, T, U, V, W, Y, X, A, N, D, Z. The quick brown fox grumped over the lazy dogs. Buster. I miss Buster. I wish I could pet him one last time. But was he ever real? Is anything? I'm so tired. So hungry. I need to focus. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy. Goodbye. The quick brown... I'm sorry, jumped over you, lazy. Goodbye. I'm quick. I've jumped disappoint all just last time. Good lazy dogs. I'm sorry. Jumped over, disappointed to you, lazy, for the lazy dogs. Goodbye. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all for the last time. Goodbye.